Michael Donovan had always been a man of solitude. After retiring from 20 years in the U.S. Army, most of it spent in Special Forces operations overseas, he found himself yearning for peace, a kind of quiet the world rarely afforded. So, he bought 10 acres of land just outside Oxford, Texas. The property came with a modest but sturdy brick ranch house, a wraparound porch, and enough wooded buffer from the road to feel isolated, even though the town was just 15 minutes away. Every morning, Michael would rise before the sun, letting his German shepherd, Rex, out to patrol the land while he brewed his coffee. Birds chirped, deer passed through the edges of the woods, and there was no sound of traffic, no shouting, no orders, only the hum of wind through the trees and the occasional bark from Rex. For a man who had seen too much of war's madness, this was more than a home, it was a sanctuary. Michael built a small greenhouse out back, grew tomatoes and peppers, and kept his tools meticulously organized in a shed he'd built by hand. He rarely saw his neighbors, and when he did, it was usually a polite wave and nod from a distance. This was how he liked it. Until Karen Malone showed up. Karen Malone wasn't from Oxford, or anywhere near it. She came from Houston, a bustling city where she'd ruled her suburban HOA like a minor dictator. When her husband passed and her children moved away, Karen sold her home and relocated to the country for what she called a new adventure. She bought the house just across the road from Michael's land, a 2-story affair with newly installed security cameras, a pristine white fence, and a manicured lawn that clashed jarringly with the natural, untamed landscape around it. Within days of moving in, Karen began introducing herself to the sparse residents in the area. She wasn't subtle. She printed flyers announcing the formation of a neighborhood committee to maintain property values and uphold standards. She used phrases like beautification plan and rural responsibility, and she began distributing surveys asking about fence heights, exterior paint choices, and livestock restrictions. Michael ignored the flyer taped to his gate. That was a mistake. Karen took the non-response personally. She showed up at Michael's gate one morning, uninvited, clipboard in hand, smile razor-sharp. "You must be Michael. I've been hearing wonderful things. I'm organizing our little enclave into a structured HOA. Just a friendly thing really, nothing legally binding yet. Just to keep the place looking nice." Michael, who had just finished cutting firewood and stood holding an axe over one shoulder, looked her over and said, "Not interested." Karen blinked, taken aback. "Well, it's not really optional. This affects everyone." "Not on my land it doesn't," Michael said, turning and walking away. From that moment, Karen marked him as an enemy of order. Karen was undeterred. If Michael wouldn't join voluntarily, she'd find another way. She began holding meetings at her home with the 3 or 4 families in the area, selling them on the idea that they had the right to create an HOA under a supposed clause buried deep in old county zoning documents. She compiled bylaws, complete with fines for infractions and a rotating presidency, though, naturally, she nominated herself as permanent president due to her experience. She printed up official-looking lettershead, signed with a mock seal that read Greater Oak Grove Community Association, and began sending notices to her neighbors. Most were too polite or confused to argue. They thought, well, it's not worth the fight. But Michael wasn't most people. The first letter he received from Karen's HOA demanded that he remove the rusted gate at the entrance of his long gravel driveway and replace it with a non-industrialized, HOA-compliant one. He burned the letter in his fire pit. 2 days later, a second letter came with a $150 fine attached. Michael ignored it. Then came the letter about his dog, Rex. Rex was no ordinary dog. He was a retired K-9, trained in detection and takedown, and had served with Michael during his final deployment. They were bonded in a way only men and their working dogs ever could be. Rex was obedient, loyal, and alert. He never strayed off Michael's land. He never barked at children. He never threatened without cause. But Karen hated him. She claimed Rex growled at her from across the road. That his presence alone intimidated her. She began filing complaints with the county animal control, alleging that the dog was a menace. When they showed up, Michael provided Rex's certifications, vet records, and military retirement papers. The officer apologized and left. That didn't stop Karen. She stood one morning at the end of Michael's drive, filming Rex as he trotted the edge of the property. When Michael approached and told her to leave, She called the sheriff. They arrived, asked some questions, and left when they realized Karen had no legal authority. Michael knew then that this wouldn't be the end of it. Karen had declared a war. She just didn't know who she was dealing with. One morning in late spring, Michael woke to the sound of a truck's engine and the unmistakable clang of metal. He stepped onto his porch and saw a crew unloading fencing material near the corner of his land, where his boundary met the roadside. Karen stood nearby, giving directions. Michael approached calmly. "What's going on?" Karen turned, smug. "We're installing uniform fencing for the neighborhood. HOA decision. You'll be reimbursed for materials if you comply." "You're putting a fence on my property?" Michael asked, voice low. "Well, technically it's on the edge," she said, gesturing. "And since you didn't attend the meetings, you forfeited input." Michael walked to the fence line, placed a hand on one of the stakes, and pulled it up with a single, slow motion. "Get off my land," he said. Karen's smile faded. "You're being unreasonable. This is for the good of the community. We have standards." Michael dropped the stake on the ground and looked her in the eyes. "You step foot past that line again, I'll press trespassing charges." Karen called him a bully, a thug. She threatened to involve county officials. Michael didn't respond. He simply stood there, arms crossed, as the workers packed up their tools and Karen stomped away, fuming. From that point forward, it was no longer just about an HOA. It was a personal vendetta. After the fencing confrontation, Karen Malone pivoted from passive-aggressive to full-on aggressive. She began filing complaints, not just to local law enforcement, but also to the county zoning board, health department, and even animal control. Each complaint was more outrageous than the last. She alleged that Michael was operating an illegal, tactical training compound due to the presence of an old obstacle course he'd built for personal use. She claimed he was burying hazardous materials in his backyard, really just compost piles. She even filed a bizarre report accusing him of harboring unlicensed firearms, despite the fact that Michael's weapons were legally registered and stored in accordance with Texas law. When county officials arrived in khakis and ball caps, Michael greeted them calmly. He walked them through his property, showed them his storage shed, his well-maintained greenhouse, and even offered coffee. Each time, they left empty-handed and slightly embarrassed. One inspector quietly admitted, "We know who she is. You're not the first she's done this to." But Karen was relentless. She hired a local attorney, Ambrose Keller, a man with a reputation for frivolous lawsuits, and tried to issue a cease and desist order to Michael for non-compliance with HOA bylaws. The catch: the HOA still wasn't legal. There was no county certification, no recorded charter, and certainly no authority over private landowners outside of a deed-restricted subdivision. Michael took the court notice and, after reading it silently, chuckled. He hadn't been in a courtroom since a military tribunal in Kabul, but he was ready if it came to that. He called an old Army friend, now a defense attorney in Dallas, and said, "Looks like I might need your services." Karen's next move crossed the line from nuisance to criminal. One morning, Michael noticed Rex sniffing at something unusual near the base of the mailbox at the edge of his driveway. Upon investigation, he found a raw hamburger patty, marbled with a faint chemical smell. His stomach turned cold. Michael was no stranger to traps. He wore nitrile gloves, bagged the meat, and took it to a private lab in Austin the same day. The results: strychnine. A classic, deadly poison. One bite, and Rex would have suffered an agonizing death. Michael didn't confront Karen directly. Not yet. He reported the incident to the county sheriff, who filed an official report but said they had no evidence linking Karen to the act. Still, Michael knew. The location. The timing. The fact that Karen had called the dog a weapon in one of her complaints. It was calculated. It was personal. Michael installed motion-activated trail cameras across his front acreage, rigging them to notify his phone in real time. He reinforced Rex's kennel with mesh armor wire and kept him inside at night. And for the first time in years, Michael retrieved a locked black case from beneath his bed, checked the slide of his sidearm, and placed it on his nightstand. He wasn't going to lose another partner. Not again. Karen's overreach had alienated many of the neighbors she once hoped to control. Families that had initially gone along with her phantom HOA began distancing themselves. One couple even sold their home to avoid further involvement. But Karen remained undeterred. That's when Michael decided to go on the offensive, not with violence, but with precision. He began attending town meetings, something he had never done before. He spoke calmly and respectfully about property rights, individual liberty, and the dangers of unregulated, unsanctioned HOAs. His words resonated. Rural Texans had a deep distrust of authoritarian rule, especially when it came from outsiders. He petitioned the county to issue a cease order against Karen's HOA, presenting evidence of her fake notices and fines. His friend in Dallas helped him file a counter-injunction, accusing Karen of harassment and defamation. He even requested a temporary restraining order, citing the attempted poisoning of Rex. The sheriff's office began investigating Karen more closely. Then, Michael created a website. He posted scanned copies of Karen's fake bylaws, her cease and desist letters, and the results of the poison lab test. He never directly accused her. He didn't have to. The truth spread like wildfire. Karen's name became synonymous with pettiness and obsession. Local Facebook groups lit up with commentary. Karen Malone. Oh, the HOA lady. Is she still going after that ex-military guy? The balance of power had shifted. It was early evening when it happened. Michael had just returned from town, groceries in hand, Rex trotting behind him. As he walked across the porch, he heard the rev of an engine, loud and growing closer. Then the crash. Karen's silver Cadillac Escalade came barreling across the road, jumped the shallow ditch, and plowed straight through Michael's fence and into the corner of his house, smashing through the living room wall with a crunch of drywall, wood, and glass. Michael hit the ground, instinctively covering his head. Rex barked furiously. When the dust settled, the SUV was half in, half out of the structure. Smoke curled from the hood. Michael ran toward it, heart pounding, unsure whether it was intentional or an accident. Karen was slumped behind the wheel, dazed but conscious. She wasn't bleeding, but her face was twisted in frustration and panic. As Michael pulled the door open, she shrieked, "This was your fault! You ruined everything!" Michael backed away slowly, jaw clenched. Emergency services arrived within minutes. Karen was taken to the hospital. The responding officers took Michael's statement. His house was heavily damaged, but he was unharmed. Rex hadn't left his side. The incident made local headlines. HOA president crashes into neighbor's home. Michael remained calm during interviews. He let the facts speak for themselves. But inside, a storm brewed. This was no longer about property lines. It was about control, obsession, and danger. The investigation moved quickly. Dashcam footage from a nearby resident showed Karen's SUV accelerating from a dead stop. There were no brake lights, only full throttle. It was intentional. When police searched Karen's home, they found damning evidence. Drafts of HOA fines targeting Michael, maps of his property with notes scribbled in the margins, and, in a locked drawer, several packets of rat poison that matched the chemical found in the hamburger. The sheriff's department filed charges: reckless endangerment, criminal mischief, attempted animal cruelty, and harassment. Karen was arrested upon her discharge from the hospital. The mugshot circulated online within hours. Karen's phantom HOA dissolved overnight. Her remaining supporters disappeared into silence. Her lawyer quit, and the county prosecutor prepared for trial. Michael rebuilt the damaged wall of his house himself. He reinforced it with concrete and steel studs, not because he feared another attack, but because he believed in building stronger than before. Neighbors began stopping by more often, bringing casseroles, asking if he needed help, shaking his hand. One of them, a widow named Alice, brought fresh pecan pie and stayed for coffee. Michael, usually guarded, smiled more than he had in years. He didn't rejoice in Karen's downfall. But justice, long overdue, had finally come. Karen Malone sat at the defense table with a look that blended disdain and disbelief. Her once pristine appearance was worn down, hair less sculpted, her clothes more frayed than tailored. The courtroom was packed. Locals had followed the case closely, many of them having been harassed by Karen themselves. Now they came to see justice unfold. The charges were numerous: criminal mischief, harassment, reckless endangerment, attempted poisoning of an animal, and fraud related to her fake HOA documents. The prosecution's evidence was damning, surveillance footage, emails, poison lab results, witness testimony, and the dashcam video showing her deliberate acceleration into Michael's home. Michael testified, his voice steady. "I'm not looking for vengeance," he said, looking directly at the jury. "I just want to live in peace and keep my dogs safe. That woman tried to take both from me." Karen's defense wobbled between denial and blaming others. Her attorney argued she had a mental health condition triggered by suburban anxiety. But the jury wasn't swayed. They saw a pattern of obsession, escalation, and violence. The poisoning attempt of Rex struck a nerve with the entire courtroom. In the end, Karen was found guilty on all major counts. She was sentenced to 2 years in county jail and ordered to pay restitution to Michael for damages to his property. When the verdict was read, she stood rigidly, refusing to speak, but her hands trembled. Her reign of control was over. After the trial, Michael returned home to a yard filled with quiet support. Locals had organized a small volunteer crew to help him clear the debris, rebuild the living room, and reinforce the fence Karen had destroyed. For a man used to solitude, it was overwhelming, but not unwelcome. He worked with purpose, releveling walls, installing reinforced windows, and even building a new porch where he could sit with Rex and drink coffee in the morning sun. He'd spent years keeping people at a distance, living by the rhythm of the land and the occasional call from an old military buddy. But now, his world had widened. One weekend, he hosted a community gathering, something small, just grilled burgers, sweet tea, and stories shared around a fire pit. Neighbors brought food and kids ran around with Rex chasing after them, tail wagging. A sense of belonging bloomed, tentative but real. Michael also found another form of healing, writing. At the encouragement of a retired teacher neighbor, he began documenting the entire ordeal. Not as a manifesto or exposé, but as a memoir, a tale of freedom, rural life, and the madness that creeps in when someone tries to bend others to their will. Rex had always been more than a dog. He was Michael's companion, protector, and confidant. But after the events that had unfolded, Rex became something more, a symbol. Local papers wrote headlines like, "K9 Hero Saves Veteran's Home," and "German Shepherd Defends Freedom from HOA Tyrant." Kids would stop by just to pet him. Neighbors dropped off chew toys and bones like offerings to a living legend. Michael was initially amused, but warmed to it. He even got Rex a custom collar with the words, "Not for sale," engraved into the brass tag, a nod to a comment Karen once made about trying to remove the animal by legal channels. A local school invited Michael and Rex to talk about service dogs and safety. Rex sat obediently as Michael shared stories about discipline, loyalty, and trust. The children listened wide-eyed. One little girl raised her hand and asked, "Is Rex braver than soldiers?" Michael smiled. "He's one of them." Rex had not only survived the ordeal, he had thrived. And he reminded the community of the kind of quiet courage that still existed in the world. Inspired by Michael's ordeal and the misuse of power by Karen Malone, county commissioners drafted and passed a new local ordinance, the Homeowners Fairness Act. The act required any homeowners association to be formally registered with the county, including bylaws, elected officers, open meeting policies, and certified charters. Any attempt to enforce fees, fines, or regulations without that certification would be considered fraud, punishable by civil penalties and potential criminal charges. Michael was invited to the meeting where it was passed. Several commissioners thanked him personally for standing his ground with integrity and restraint. He didn't give a speech, just nodded and said, "It's about time people remembered who really owns their land out here." The act sent ripples across the state. Nearby counties began reviewing their own HOA policies. Karen's case had become a cautionary tale, a line in the sand between neighborly cooperation and authoritarian overreach. Months passed. The seasons turned. And Michael finally allowed himself to breathe. The house was whole again, stronger, more fortified, but still warm and inviting. Rex's coat had grown glossier, his energy back to full strength. The fear, the tension, the sense of being hunted, it had all lifted. Michael sat on his porch one evening, a glass of whiskey in hand, Rex at his feet. The sun dipped below the tree line in a blaze of amber and gold. There were no threats on the horizon. No trucks slowing down to watch. No letters demanding compliance. And then Alice, the widow with the pecan pie, pulled up in her beat-up Chevy. She stepped out with 2 mugs and a flask of coffee. "Figured you could use some company," she said. Michael looked at Rex. The dog gave a single bark, approval. "Yeah," Michael said. "I think I could." The past had tested him. The war, the isolation, the siege from within his own town. But he had endured, not through aggression, but resilience. And now, finally, peace wasn't just an idea. It was home.